Awakener was first introduced to us in the 4.5 anniversary update. Ever since her release, she has been a strong staple in the game, capable of doing a lot of crazy things. There's really no downside when it comes to using her. So what about her that makes her so relevant in the first place? And the best place to start it off is her talent. She gets more damage increase and more range, but at 5 stars is where she really wants to be at because she gets a max of 4 range, and her damage is able to go higher as well the higher her star level is, to a max of 30%. But that's not all. After taking action, she can apply a spellbound to 2 enemies that reduces healing effects and slows them down. When she dies, she applies a special towel that pretty much acts like a revive for her. It reduces her stat by 30% when that does happen, and she will die within 3 turns. But if she gets a kill within those 3 turns of reviving, she gets fully healed and gets fully revived. That only triggers once per battle. So yeah, we get that she can slow down enemies. But that unique way of reviving is a huge comeback factor. Even though you are losing 30% of her stat when she revives, she's still gonna be putting up a lot of damage because of the damage increase from her talent, and she has a faction buff that she can apply. So there's no real worry about her death timer, as she is still gonna be a very dangerous threat, using everything that she still has access to. And by the way, it does refresh everything on her, so she can apply spellbound, use her faction buff again, and so on and so forth. I should also mention that this tile, this special tile, it can overlap other tiles, even the gas that insta-kills you in Apex Arena. It literally just goes through anything. And even characters like Polly and Maya, who can erase any kind of tile, they are not able to remove it, which is really wild. Another thing that you should really take note of is that this treats her as being dead for the remainder of that round. So what that means is that when she's by herself, even though that she can basically revive herself, the game treats her as being fully dead. Because the way how they're treating it is not like a revive, it's technically like another version of her, like a clone, is what they're trying to describe it as. So yeah, you really want to be mindful of that. It's not like any other revive. Now the one biggest aspect when it comes to using Awakener is a faction buff. Now what about it that makes it so important? Well, it's one of the biggest reasons why you should be getting her. Because she's a time faction buffer. Its special effect gives a general 8% damage increase that doubles to 16% when fighting enemies with Spellbound. You'll only be getting this faction buff if you have her at level 70, since it is part of her Thxs skill. These are most of the time the most powerful skills the characters have in their arsenal. Not just that, you'll need the necessary materials to go through their first awakening stage and then finally onto their second awakening stage to actually unlock them. With that said, Awakener is going to be buffing up characters like Jintoki, Lina, and the recently new one, Ice Melda. There are 3 other faction buffers that do exist in the game, 2 of which that we may never see again. One is Joshua from the Trail series, the first crossover that we ever had. He's an AoE attacker that gives a 20% increase to AoE attacks. And then we have Yusuke, a single target attacker that gives a 15% increase to single target attacks when using a skill. I wouldn't really worry about missing out unless you're a collector, because there are issues when it comes to using them. When it comes to using Joshua, he's mainly an AoE attacker that relies on fixed damage, and Yusuke takes way too long to set up and gets heavily punished for it. The other faction buffer is Angelica, which is a character that you can get for free by playing the story. Only that with her faction buff doesn't give a special effect, just only the stat increase. And even though she is an SR character who is free, so you may think that she may not be as good, but that's not the case. Angelica is a support character with a fun yet reliable 3C skill that heals you. Also with a fun 1C skill that heals you to full that changes your class type, which can be used quite often. So if you're running a time team without Awakener, or if you have her without the faction buff, then using Angelica is very viable. However, if you do have Awakener with the 3C, there are better support characters for you to use. Not only is Awakener's 3C a faction buff, it's also an AoE attack, a very powerful one at that. It's weak at first, but it does more damage the more time it hits the same enemy. It applies any 2 random debuffs, and if it only hits 1 enemy, the cooldown is reduced by 3. And if the enemy does not have any soldiers, then the damage is increased by 300%. If it kills, it removes the cooldown of her talent or Spellbound. So yeah, it really encourages you to use it on one enemy but you're really getting your worth in with all those benefits. Most of the time you're going to be killing with this skill on that one singular enemy, since it scales to a 60% damage increase. Plus with how hard of a hitter that Awakener already is, you're going to see those numbers go really high for a AoE attack. Now the one thing that's really important to note is that 300% damage increase. It sounds good to be true, and that's because it is. You're really only going to be seeing those numbers if that enemy had no soldiers to begin with. So you just simply can't wipe out the soldier and then use a 3C to see those high numbers. No, that's not how it works. They must not have any soldiers to begin with at all, whatsoever. Only then will you see that 3C hit very extremely hard. So enemies like those include the dragon, for example, the eternal temple bosses. So yeah, it's really understandable to get tricked by this. The one and only 3C skill that really makes sense to use it against bosses, as it outputs a stupid amount of damage. Onto her skill sets, it's really not that bad. She has a single target skill that does more damage against enemies with spellbound that will also heal her and can teleport 2 blocks afterwards. Lightning and Fireball are also her single target skills. Her AoEs include Black Hole, Dark Breath, and Thunder Zone. She even has support skills like Teleport to reposition a teammate or herself, which is something that you really only see in PvP most of the time, as well as a unique skill. She can swap places with one of her teammates that provides 2 random buffs. It can also be used on the enemy for the opposite effect, but they can only be swapped if they have the spellbound debuff. Her skill sets are somewhat diverse. In regular content, you'll mainly be carrying single target skill alongside her 3C for the faction buff, because like I said, it's the one and only 3C that makes sense to use against a single enemy, as you can actually land kills with it. However, in PvP, you'll see something like her unique 1C for the repositioning alongside with an AoE like Black Hole, and you're able to position a lot better compared to her other AoEs. Some other stuff that you should know about Awakener is that you will need Grand Shield for her toughness bond and Adon Camo for her strength bond. She can either be a mage or a demon unit for her classes. The mage class is a lot better since you won't have any weakness against holy class, which is very common to see, even though her demon class gives her more stats. In regular content, you are able to get away with a lot of things, but in PvP, your choices really matter a lot. Even with the soldier choices, there's a lot of great ones that she can use. Like for example, the Crystal Warlock, they are really great for surviving stuff, but you're not going to be hitting as hard with them. The harder hitting ones include like the Poison Bat Mage, they can hit relatively hard and apply a debuff, and also the Sorceress. You also see people use like the Ghost of the Fog, which in my opinion are pretty decent, not as great as Poison Bat Mage and Sorceress. And you do also see the Glacial Elemental, which you really only see if there are like water tiles. And if we're gonna talk about builds, you simply just build her the way just like any other attacking mages. So you can use stuff like the Miracle Staff for more AoE damage, Scepter for more range on her single target attacks, you got Red Moon for the huge HP and int increase. With the armor, you can use Tenyos. Helmet, there's a lot of good ones like the Tenyos. And then with accessory, anything to increase her int is really all that matters. Of course, some of the better ones that you might be thinking of is Dimensional Jewel. Overall, Awakener is a very strong flexible support DPS, who performs at her very best, getting her to at least 5 stars and have her 3C. Getting her would not only just add her as a very strong addition to your team, but she's the only viable time faction buffer that we have so far. And that is very important if you want to use time characters. Otherwise, you're going to be relying a lot on other support characters that helps to buff them up. And I'd say even if we do get a new one, I feel like Awakener is still going to be very relevant. Limiting to enemies' mobility, very strong with her damage and support, as well as having a comeback mechanic that's treated as a unique way of reviving. Even in Apex Arena, she can fit in any kind of playstyle, whether it be a rush box, turtle box, tank push. She's very flexible in every way. Heck, even when she first got released, she completely changed the rush meta, because now the first ban priority will either be Awakener first or Rosencio, and no matter what, either one of them will always be first picked. So it just really made it hard for like rush boxes to engage effectively, because we now have another character who counters that kind of playstyle. Even to this day, she is still regarded as a high ban priority because of the way how she can control the pace of the game. Alright, so hopefully I did a good enough job of convincing you all why Awakener is a must summon for everyone. I did my best to review and do a ton of research to make this video possible, so that I didn't miss any single detail on her whatsoever. But of course, I'm only human, so if there was anything I failed to point out about her, Feel free to let me know down in the comments. Some of you guys may be wondering why I keep calling her Awakener instead of something like Ayo. That's because in the CN side, Awakener was her name, and that's how I first saw her. I think it sounds way more cooler. But if you guys did enjoy this video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe, want to see more, and feel free to let me know down in the comments if this video was useful for some of you guys. I've been always wanting to make a different type of video for some of you guys, so yeah, if it did, I'm glad that it did. So yeah, thanks for watching. Your fellow Z.